Hello, everyone. We are going to take notes on types of cells today. So let's go ahead and update our table of contents. So the first, the left side or the input is going to be types of cells. That'll be notes, page 25. And then page 26, we're actually going to be building a wanted add. And that'll be your output on page 26. So go ahead and pause the video if you need to make sure that you have this completely caught up. If for some reason you have skipped something at some point, make sure you take the time to fix it. That's important. It's important to be able to locate exactly which page your work is on. I'm going to flip to page 25 now. Right now, the only expectation is that you have a title at the top, types of cells. We always want the title to match what we call it in our table of contents, so that makes it nice and easy to confirm that you're on the right place. So like I said, we're going to talk about types of cells. Every single cell falls into two main categories. There's tons of types of cells, tens of thousands, but there's all of them fall into one of two categories. So we're going to talk about those two main categories today. The first category is prokaryote, or sometimes called prokaryotic. So I'm going to say prokaryotic cells. I'm going to put this on the left side. On the right side, I'm going to put eukaryotic cells. And then for both of those, I am going to kind of turn this into a chart. So we've divided into two categories. I might put a box around these to give it some visual separation. Okay. Awesome. So we've got our two types of cells. We're going to list information underneath each about those types. First thing I want to point out is this term here, karyo. You'll see that it pops up in both words. So I'm going to make a little side note here that the root karyo means kernel. Kernel as in like central or nucleus. If you've been around science world long enough, you've probably heard the term nucleus before. A nucleus of a cell is where the instructions for the cell come from. It's basically where the DNA is held. It tells the cell what kind of cell to be. So this karyo word comes in both words. One is essentially saying this is the type of cell where there isn't a nucleus. It's before a nucleus is formed, evolutionary wise, not like within that life of that organism. And this one is saying it contains a nucleus. So that's actually the primary definition of each. So for this one, does not contain a nucleus, or what we're going to call membrane-bound organelles, which just are types of organelles, which are tiny structures within the cell that are bound and protected by membranes. And we'll talk more about that. It'll make sense later on. One way I remember this as well is pro rhymes with no, so no nucleus. Okay, this one on the other hand is the opposite. Contains a nucleus, and membrane bound organelles. So either a cell does or doesn't have a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. That's the main distinguishing factor. I'm going to give other characteristics of each of these, but the primary definition is this. I also want to point out your levels of organization from your previous unit, which showed you that if you follow along, cells are made of organelles. Whether or not they are membrane bound or whether or not one of those organelles is a nucleus depends on if it's a prokaryote or a eukaryote, or prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Okay, prokaryotes, they're less evolutionarily advanced, and so they're less complex overall. Their DNA tends to be sort of jumbled in the center and not really organized, not even in the center, just in the cell itself. They're also smaller and they're unicellular. Unicellular meaning they are they're single-celled. They're one-celled organisms. Okay. On the contrary, though, remember I said the main defining factor is prokaryotes. For prokaryotes, eukaryotes is that one contains a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles and the other doesn't. So this is always unicellular, but eukaryotes can actually be either. They can be unicellular or multicellular organisms. So based on this information, you should already know which type of cells you are made of. You are a multicellular organism. We talked about you are made of trillions of cells. You are not one cell like a bacteria. So you are made of eukaryotic cells. So one way to remember this one is you, which is how this is pronounced. You are made of eukaryotic cells. And prokaryotes have no nucleus. Okay, I'm giving you some mnemonics. Feel free to sort of just jot those down as you hear them. I'm not going to write them down, but it's helpful information. Okay, we're also going to note that the primary type of reproduction, so how these particular prokaryotes reproduce, is through something called binary fission. It's a fancy word for one becomes two. So we talked about the cell theory, how one cell splits to become two, right? So while that is true for all cells, the only method of reproduction for organisms that are prokaryotic is one cell becomes two. So you have a single cell. It's going to split to become two identical cells. All right. We actually have, this is called asexual reproduction. Okay. On the contrary, eukaryotic cells actually can do either. So you're multicellular, which means at a cellular level, your cells that make up your body are splitting through binary fission the same way one cell becomes two. Now, as an organism, we don't reproduce the same way. It would be pretty cool. It would be terrifying, but it would be pretty cool if all of a sudden I could just split in two and become a second one, but it doesn't work that way. So we don't just reproduce asexually through binary fission. We also reproduce sexually, and that's a whole separate process. Our cells go through a different thing entirely. The process is called meiosis, which we'll get into later, but it's an entirely different beast, so to speak. So the reproductive method for this, for eukaryotes, is both asexual, binary fission, and, or I should say or, because there are some unicellular organisms that are eukaryotes, or sexual. Now, we are organisms that do both. There's asexual in our cells, but there's also sexual reproduction through our actual organisms, reproducing actual organisms. Okay, a lot of vocabulary words coming at you, but the prefix a here just means without. So sexual, without sex, without the use of two. This is with two people, two to tango. Okay, too much information. The next component we're going to talk about is size. So you can just even look at these and tell, this one's less complex. It doesn't have all of these membrane-bound organelles, and it's unicellular. They reproduce just by splitting. Prokaryotes, less complex, much smaller. In fact, their size, I'm going to give you an approximate size. It's actually just really hard to even visualize this. You can't do it. So their size is between, that symbol just kind of means somewhere in between 1 to 5 microns or micrometers. This is about, so one micrometer equals about 1 × 10⁻⁶ of a meter. So that, you think about a centimeter, a millimeter even, this is smaller than that. So we can't even measure it in like the terms that we would normally measure it in. So very small, very small. As opposed to this, which, I don't expect you to have this memorized, but to illustrate the size difference between the two, these are closer to about 10 to 100 micrometers. So same unit here, 1 to 5 versus 10 to 100. So big difference. I'm going to give you a rough drawing, but I want to challenge you to go on to Google and look up the difference, like look up prokaryotes, look up eukaryotes, and you'll see more detailed drawings. And I just wanted you to sort of get the feel for those. Let's do some examples first. So the types, there's actually 2 predominant types that all prokaryotes fit into. Bacteria, which, as you probably know, there's thousands, millions of varieties of bacteria, and then archaea, which are usually a bit more like extremophiles. We'll talk more about those another time. But these are very simple unicellular cells. That's it. That's what these are. And they're pretty basic in structure. They tend to have a cell membrane, which is gives them their overall shape. And then their DNA is just jumbled up sort of wherever. It's not organized. They tend to have a tail. And no, sperm are not prokaryotes. They're eukaryotes. And they have these little cilia things that help with movement. But there's so many different varieties of prokaryotes that having one concrete drawing is nearly impossible. So this is a very rough, basic drawing. Like I said, please Google it. On the contrary, examples of eukaryotes are literally everything else. Besides bacteria and archaea, everything else has nucleus and membrane-bound organelles, or at least everything else that we know about. has these features. There are unicellular, like I said, there are unicellular asexually reproducing eukaryotes, but those would have to have a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles, such as an amoeba or a paramecium. Those are great examples. So in addition to, obviously there's, like I said, parameciums and different things, but typically you're going to see cells that look a little more like the ones in your body or the ones that make up multicellular organisms. So typically they are kind of round-ish or rectangular-ish, but there's no exact appearance to these. So again, please look these up. One feature that is pretty, well, it's going to be standard is there's going to be a nucleus, the nucleolus, somewhere in the cell. Doesn't necessarily mean it's in the center. And there's also organelles. So I'm just going to draw some like random organelles. I know what they are. I'll tell you what they are. They're not all going to be covered in these little tiny drawings. Also, these are starting to look like eyes, which is funny. Okay, so there's things called mitochondria. There's endoplasmic reticulum. There's ribosomes, which just look like little dots. There's Golgi, which I always think looks like a Wi-Fi symbol. If this were a plant cell, which plant cells tend to be more structured, more rectangular, rigid in shape, they tend to have this big thing called a vacuole, which stores water. They also have chloroplast and ribosomes, Golgi bodies, etc. There's so many differences. There's so many organelles. Don't feel like you need to get this precise, but just gives you a rough indication of their appearance. Again, please Google it. Okay, but the main thing on these, if you'll see, is nucleus with DNA inside, as opposed to this one, which is the DNA just floating around unorganized in an organism. These are much more organized. Each little organelle has its own role. We talked about organelle meaning like tiny organs. Like think about the organs in your body have a function the same way the organelles in the cells have specific functions. Okay, those are your notes. I could go on and on about that, but I hope you got everything that you need. We're going to move over to the output. Now, I want to talk about it before you start doing too much with it. Okay, so you're basically creating a wanted ad. So if you Google wanted ad, you'll see like wanted criminal ads from like old Western movies or from that time period. Still very real. So you're going to create a wanted ad, but you're going to pretend like it's one of the cells are wanted. They've done something. You got to use your imagination. So you're going to pick either prokaryotic or eukaryotic and decide which one of those are wanted. So I've created a sample layout with the content that must appear, but how you actually lay it out is totally up to you. But let's pretend this whole thing is the ad. Usually there's going to be some kind of reward value for finding the wanted prokaryote or eukaryote. There's going to be a photo. Please do not just draw what I drew here. Go and find a picture of a prokaryote or eukaryote and draw it, or print it and put it in your notebook. That's fine too. Color is always best, but not required in this case. Then you're going to put a name on the cell. You can give it a creative name, but just make sure you are indicating whether or not you are using a prokaryote or eukaryote. This is the part where you can get a little creative. Where were they last seen? You know, if it's a prokaryote, so it's bacteria, maybe they were last seen on the sink in your house. I don't know. Just using my imagination. Where were they last seen? A description. So kind of a brief summary. This is the part where, so you know how when you do your self-assessment and you've got content demonstrates understanding. If you want, this is where you actually show me that you get it. you're actually demonstrating you get it. So you're actually going to describe or summarize that type of cell in sentence form. So it can be eukaryote or prokaryote, prokaryote. You're going to describe that particular type of cell. And then, I mean, it can't be wanted without having committed a crime. So come up with some silly crime that your cell did. So maybe it's a eukaryotic cell, it's paramecium, or maybe it's an amoeba and it swallowed your friend whole, which is amoeba's a really cool way of eating or consuming nutrients. So feel free to Google that too. So this whole thing does not have to be laid out this way, but this is the content that's expected to be on it. You can always add more, you can elaborate, you can make it fabulous and beautiful. I hope you do, but make it your own. Okay, this is one sample template. All right, I hope you enjoyed learning about prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Remember, you are eukaryotic. Bye.